to transfer by submarine
Mm.
the fissile material that went into the bombs that we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Mm.
That the Trinity project was completed
Mm.
with Nazi highly enriched uranium, and that it was transferred in an agreement that we made with the SS.
Wow.
Okay?
You're high conviction in that.
Well, this is what he argues, and he's
Okay.
done this. His book is Critical Mass.
Yep.
Okay, and he lays out a huge argument for this. Now, here's the problem: if we got our uranium from them,
Mhm.
and by the way, he also makes the argument that the engineering of the plutonium bomb
Mm-hmm.
was completed with Nazi assistance.
Mm.
Okay, so if we got our uranium and additional technical expertise for completing our nuclear weapons from the Nazis, and if there are 2 reports of Nazi successful nuclear tests in 44 and 45,
Yeah.
why weren't these weapons used by the Nazis?
It's a great question. Why?
Well, there are a couple of different answers, and they're both really disturbing.
Okay.
Let me start with, I don't know which one is more disturbing. Okay, okay. So if Ronald Richter is working on fusion
Mm-hmm.
in Argentina in 1950,
Mm-hmm.
is it possible, and the Nazis had, let's say they've developed this bell that involves electromagnetic torsion of thorium
Yeah.
and some kind of a plasma fusion that takes place inside of this device.
Mm.
Is it possible the Nazis figured out some other kind of nuclear reaction, weaponizable nuclear reaction, besides fission? And is that related to why Ronald Richter was promising fusion bombs to Juan Perón, which he never delivered?
Interesting. I didn't know he was promising fusion bombs.
Yeah, he was promising nuclear weapons, and this is why the IAEA went down there.
Fusion bombs. No.
Well, okay, he's working on fusion, and he's promising nuclear bombs to Perón.
Mm-hmm.
So we may assume from those 2 data points that he's promising fusion bombs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we only developed fusion bombs.
And hydrogen bombs are fusion bombs, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But here's the interesting thing, is that we developed hydrogen fusion bombs in the 50s. And this is 1950. Ronald Richter's down there. So it's relatively the same ballpark time frame.
Yeah,
okay?
Edward Teller and Ulam, that design was 52.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Our hydrogen bombs use a fission trigger to create a fusion reaction. What if the Nazis figured out how to create a fusion reaction without a fission trigger? It would be extremely useful because the radioactivity of a nuclear explosion comes from the fission trigger. The neutron bombardment that, well, first of all, immediately disrupts like a whole, our whole organism, and then also irradiates all the fallout that comes down on people. That neutron bombardment is from the fission reaction, not from the fusion. So if you could create a fusion reaction without a fission trigger, you'd have a clean nuclear bomb. An extremely high explosive force, but no radioactivity. So your troops could move into that area and occupy it immediately.
Really? There'd be no radioactivity.
No radioactivity.
Straight to fusion.
It's the opposite of a neutron bomb. So a neutron bomb is engineered to maximize neutron bombardment. This is an aneutronic fusion bomb. If the Nazis developed that in 1944 to 45, atom bombs would be like matches for them. It's child's play. So they would be willing to trade that for something else, like maybe the, mass assimilation and, amnesty for Nazi scientists, like maybe incorporation of their entire SS spy network in Eastern Europe into the CIA. Like perhaps the transfer of a huge amount of funds, wartime loot, to Argentina and other places, that they made a deal and gave the matches to the Americans. They kept the fusion bombs for themselves.
You don't think they'd just vaporize large swaths of American territory and try to win?
Now this comes to the second reason, okay? Which is even more disturbing.
Okay.
All right. And I almost apologize for how disturbing this is.
No.
Okay? But people need to really think about this because I think we're still inside this spider's web. And it's responsible for a lot of the deception, misdirection around the disclosure conversation today.
Okay.
So you have to take seriously this claim on the part of the Nazi leadership that they wanted a 1,000-year Reich. Okay? 1,000-year imperium is no joke. Americans have a very hard time with this because this country was born yesterday in historical terms, okay? There are other people who are capable of grasping this more effectively. Let me give you an example, and trust me, it's worth setting it up like this.
And for context for the audience, real quick, Third Reich is called that because I believe it was the Roman Empire, then the Holy Roman Empire, and they were supposed to be the third instantiation.
Yeah. So they want this 1,000-year Reich. Okay, well, who thinks like that? In Iran, there was a dynasty that's often misnamed the Second Persian Empire. Actually, they weren't Persians, they were Scythians, the Parthian Empire of Iran, okay? It lasted for 400 years. The Parthian Empire of Iran was the principal rival of Rome. So the two superpowers in the world at that time were the Roman Empire and the Parthian Empire of Iran. And at that time, the country was called Aryana Khashatra, Aryan Imperium. That was the official name of the Parthian government, was Aryan Imperium. And then Aryana gets shortened to Iran in Middle Persian. So these Parthians ruled Iran and successfully fought the Romans, usually to a stalemate, for 400 years. Then they get overthrown in a coup by these guys called the Sassanids, the Sassanid Persians, and they established their own empire. But the Parthian elite continue to be the backbone of the Sassanid state. The feudal houses, the Parthian feudal houses, serve the Sassanid state and protect it the way like in Game of Thrones, you have all the main houses in Game of Thrones, and they're like serving, what's that place? You know, the capital, whatever it is, right? In Game of Thrones, what is that place? I forget. Anyway, the Lannisters are there, and like all the other feudal houses are serving them, right?
Yes, yeah.
So get this. The Parthians rule Iran for 400 years directly.
Yeah.
They continue to rule Iran secretly for another 400 years under the Sassanids. They're the backbone of the Sassanid state. In the end, the conflict, make a very long story short, the conflict they had with the Sassanids results in the collapse of Iran to Islam. The state security of Iran and the conquest of the Persian Empire by the Arab Muslim armies was on account of basically the tension between the Sassanids and these feudal lords. So Iran then is subsumed by Islam for a couple hundred years. Round about 850, 900, an Iranian Renaissance begins, which is misnamed often the Islamic Golden Age. 90% of the people who contributed to it in the arts and sciences were Iranians. Anyway, the Parthians are also the patrons of this. So they become like the Medicis. They become the patrons of an Iranian Renaissance for another 300 years, between 900 and 1100. So these people ruled Iran directly for 400 years, ruled Iran indirectly for another 400 years, 800 years. And then for another 300 years, they patroned an Iranian Renaissance, 1100 years. For over 1,000 years, these feudal families had a coherent political vision. That's how you need to think when you want a 1,000-year Reich. Okay? So if the Nazis in the modern world want to set up a 1,000-year imperium, it's going to require a little bit of preparation. Investing a century in psychological warfare and social engineering to set up your 1,000-year Reich is not at all an unreasonable investment. And so my hypothesis is that from 1945 until 2045, we are in a period of preparation involving horrendous psychological warfare and social engineering by a deeply entrenched fascist elite. Let's not call them Nazis anymore because they're really not nationalists. A deeply entrenched fascist elite that controls the American deep state. So that's the second answer to why did they not win the war? No, they won the war. It's just you have to rethink what the war is. The war is a Weltanschauungskrieg. It's a worldview war. And that doesn't mean what Americans think it does. So like when we went into Germany in 1945, the American military went in there, they translated Weltanschauungskrieg into psychological warfare. And then later it became, the battle for hearts and minds, right? Psychological operations, psyops, or psychological warfare. That's not what Weltanschauungskrieg means. It means a war over the constitution of the world from out of human consciousness on a social level. And it goes back to German thinkers like Schelling, Friedrich Schelling, and also ultimately Nietzsche, definitely Nietzsche's idea of perspectival conflict, that there's no unified God's eye perspective on the world. There is, of course, God is dead, right? I mean, Nietzsche is the ultimate deconstructor of a theistic, monistic ontology. So there's no God to have a perspective on the whole world. And there's nothing like a God's eye perspective even in science. And science is always conditioned by culture and by politics. So ontologically, the world is pluralistic. I mean, William James also made this point. He wrote a whole book called A Pluralistic Universe, which if you look at the ontology of William James's radical empiricism in his book, A Pluralistic Universe, it almost completely maps onto Nietzsche's perspectival ontology. And I compared the two explicitly in Prometheus and Atlas. So you have this conflict of perspectives that brings about the constitution of what we consider to be the world. Heidegger, beginning in Being and Time and going into his writings on technology, he calls this the worldhood of the world. What makes a world of meaning for any people is not the same as how the warp and weft of meaning is brought together by another people. So there is a conflict of worlds over the earth. Different worlds constituted by, let's say, what Jung might call the collective unconscious of a particular people. And by the way, this is a point that's often, I don't know whether it's overlooked or whether it's deliberately distorted in readings of Jung, is that Jung did not believe in a single collective unconscious. Jung believed in a racially differentiated collective unconscious. And he's getting that idea from Hegel. And Hegel's philosophy of mind, Hegel talks about the spirit of different races and how the spirit of different, it sounds crazy, but Hegel even thinks that the spirit of different races can shape the world geologically. In any case, I don't know that Jung would certainly take it that far, but Jung kind of got that idea from him and he developed it to where, like, for example, he's predicted that the spirit of Wotan would erupt from out of the collective unconscious of the German people. And it did, right, in the form of the rise of the Nazis in the Second World War. So Heidegger is saying that there's a war, and very much lines up again with Nietzsche, there's a war of different worlds over the earth. So World War II is not what we think it is. First of all the deep Nazi thinkers did not see any difference between World War I and World War II. If you read, for example, Carl Schmitt, you see this. You read Heidegger, you see this. They say it's just the World War. And the World War, the Great War, never ended for us. The Treaty of Versailles was imposed on them. They considered themselves to be like in a perpetual state of war for the world. And so you have to understand the term World War in a different way. It's a Weltanschauungskrieg. It's a war over the way that the world is going to show itself, is going to come into presence, is going to manifest.